Thank you so much, guys. We're right behind you. Okay, now we're going down to the pointy end. So I would like to welcome up to the stage General Manager of Pearman Media, Katie Lazornik, and also Tim Burrowes for a fireside chat about the media industry. There's no one a better commentator than the media industry than Tim, so this should be quite interesting. His views on the industry and also the indies and the changing landscape.
Wonderful. And Sam, it's Katie Lozanchich is the surname, just to correct in case my husband is listening and upset about the pronunciation.
Usual spelling.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with us this afternoon.
Thank you for the invitation.
We've got about half an hour, so let's make sure we're comfortable. And I know you've had a flight this morning, so you might be slightly tired.
I have. It's one of those days where I woke up in Auckland and I'll be going to bed in Tasmania. So, long day.
Good. Well, look, I'm delighted to spend the time with you. You probably don't need much of information, introduction, but I think I might just say a few words to set the context. For those that don't know, Tim was the founder of online publication Mumbrella back in 2008. Have I got the timing right?
Correct.
In a basement in somewhere in the inner west.
Much in Chippendale.
Spent 10 years or so covering everything about media and marketing, and then sold the business. Spent a bit of time writing a book, an excellent book, Unmade, which you coined the most disruptive decade in media.
So far.
So far, absolutely. And off the back of that, obviously, you launched the excellent Unmade online publication, which I'm assuming lots of people in here subscribe to. And then you've had a coming home of sorts with your reintroduction into the world of Mumbrella.
That's right. We're, I think, 3 or 4 weeks back into the business now.
Absolutely. So I would love to ask a few questions about that. But I'd like to start, Tim, if I may, just asking you a few questions about the themes in your book and the sense of disruption that you covered. And the book covers the period 2010 to 2020, with a few years into this decade. So we're some 5 years post the period of that. Do you think we'll ever have a period as disruptive as that decade?
I have a hunch, and I know I'm not the only one to think that this is just the pace of change now. You know, that old cliche of the speed of change will never be as slow again. You know, I think right now the thing that we're all seeing racing down the track already here is AI, you know, and that is already making that previous decade seem quite slow in comparison, I think. You know, that's what's next going to change things. I think that, yeah, the decade just gone, we were just seeing this sort of, I guess, swing, and perhaps one of the pendulums that was swinging was we were swinging away from advertising pays for our content as consumers through to consumer pays, you know, whether it was the rise of paywalls for digital publications, whether it was the rise of the streaming platforms. And then that pendulum has begun to swing back the other way as, you know, the likes of Netflix discovers they would quite like an advertising tier and so on. So I think there are sudden disruptions like we're seeing now, but also like the big forces which swing in one direction or maybe back in the other.
Okay. So do you think in 5 years' time you'll be writing a book about the most disruptive decade in history?
I really hope not, because I hated the process of writing the book.
Okay.
But there's also just this annoying little voice in my head that's started to look for the patterns that if I did do another one, how I'd do it. But
okay.
hopefully not, though.
What are those kind of themes, though, that you're seeing, if I may ask? Obviously, we've had some really interesting panels today. I don't think you were here this morning for the CEO panel. We obviously had the bodies here shortly ago. And obviously some really interesting perspectives in terms of where TV is going, where, correctly, news publishing is going, etc. Where do you think those kind of battlegrounds and those key areas are going?
Yeah, I found myself thinking, particularly as I was watching the leaders of the industry bodies speaking, that maybe a decade ago we were talking about local media owners arguing for what felt sometimes to me like a sort of a special interest argument, you know, and it was more a question of how much money they were making as local media owners. Now it sometimes feels like if you want local media to survive and thrive, which logically, if you're a brand, logically, if you're a media agency, that should be a useful thing to have. You have to support it. You know, that's perhaps, you know, where it's changed. I I think where there's still a real challenge for the industry, and I'll talk about the media owners, is actually speaking as one voice. You know, making the case for. I thought it was really interesting. Vanessa Lyon's point on some sort of made in Australia badge, which
that is interesting.
as I say, almost felt like special pleading before, but now it's at the point that if you value it, then it won't automatically be there if you don't find ways of supporting it. You know, but that then comes for the industry to speak as one voice, and we've seen, you know, recently Think TV not speaking up for TV terribly well because the different members aren't united as one voice. It's unfair to point to this, or in case people don't remember which one it was, I won't point it out, but Vanessa made that point around we should have a Made in Australia. And then immediately one of the other people on the panel made the point that the industry should invest with their medium. And it just feels like coming together as one voice, which is possible. Brian's proved it with Boomtown that it is possible to bring people together, but it's not happening. And if it doesn't happen soon, it might be too late.
Yeah, and Adam made the point as well, wouldn't it be nice if they stopped arguing amongst themselves and made decisions? But just picking up on Think TV, I thought, obviously, you know, we talked about this disruption. It was a pretty disruptive week in the TV market last week or the week before. Obviously, the news from Seven with their performance, and then the Kim Portrait news at Think TV, etc. So how do you think the TV market themselves can pull together and address that? And what role do you think TV or something like that should play? And how do they do that?
I guess if you get back to the first principles, TV is a really great medium. There are great ways of using it to sell stuff. So that's the ultimate point, I suppose. But where the TV industry in particular has lost its way is it's not finding a way of speaking with one voice. It can't quite decide what it is for the industry in a way that I'm not sure is happening necessarily in other markets at the moment. Now, it probably works through, you know, it did it before. You know, let's remember there wasn't a Think TV before 2000, I think it was 15, 16, and the industry came together. Yeah. And that was because the individuals leading those organisations actually agreed that maybe they should stop kicking the shit out of each other and look at the wider threat they faced. But then, of course, individuals changed, and the nature of some of these organisations is they just like to fight with each other. Yeah. But they have to leave that temptation behind.
Absolutely. And just picking up on that, you talked about that kind of coming together. And one of the stories or the themes I loved in the book, you wrote about the blue team and the white team coming together at Fairfax and how they worked behind the scenes to create a model that really kind of brought something to life. Do you think that in the industry there are people behind the scenes somewhere really trying to think that through and how they overcome some of these challenges? I'd like to think so, but I wonder if you've got some insight on whether that's happening or not.
Yeah, look, also I would hope so. Definitely one of the things I found as a journo, you know, not just writing the book but covering the industry, is the closer you get to the backstory of what's happened, the more you realise there are actually smart people behind the scenes. And sometimes you come across these inexplicable decisions or bad decisions, bad strategic moves, and then almost the problem is the more you actually find out how they got there, the more understandable it becomes, and the more muddy your writing becomes as you start sort of actually understanding what the factors behind the scenes are. But yeah, what it takes are really clear thinking people who can actually make that stuff happen. So, you know, the Fairfax example you used was where Greg Highwood brought in Chris Jans and his team, and they just fundamentally rethought the business model and made it work. We saw it happen relatively recently as well with Hugh Marks, where, you know, he really helped re-engineer Nine with the, let's call it a takeover, because that's what it was, of Fairfax, and create a much stronger company as a result than otherwise it would have been. You know, so I'm absolutely fascinated to see what he does with the ABC next, because that's an even bigger challenge.
Absolutely. Great. Now, we were lucky enough to have a quick chat last week, and one of the things that we said we were quite excited about was the fact that the RBA were going to make their rate cut announcement the day before we chat. And obviously we had the announcement yesterday that we had the interest rate cut at last. And so I'm quite interested to what impact that you think that's going to be having. I know in your newsletter it hasn't made any impact at this stage on the media market. But what kind of conversations do you expect to be taking place from either advertisers or media owners, and how might the next period look?
Yeah, I guess that's interesting, isn't it? Because so much comes into consumer confidence, obviously. The latest Roy Morgan numbers came out last night, down 1.6 points, which is down for this year, but up compared to the same time a year before. Yeah, it sort of felt like everybody had factored in this quarter point cut, to the extent that almost it became downbeat because the signals were so strong from the Reserve Bank that maybe there won't be that much more to come. Obviously, the huge factor is the election coming very soon.
Yeah.
It's going to make a big difference. But yeah, as I was alluding to, I was. I guess so much is confidence. I was in New Zealand last night. We did an edition of Compass, which is our sort of panel in the pub thing that we've done in Australia as well. And just the sense I got there is, however tough and however bad we feel we have it in the Australian media market, wow, just be glad you're not running a New Zealand media business at the moment, because it's really tough. You know, we maybe have a problem of kind of confidence, or let's call it a kind of advertising or media recession in Australia, but an okay-ish economy. You know, that's not the case in New Zealand. You know, but both the media market's tough and the economy's in even worse trouble as well. So it's how do we find a way of moving forward from that and just finding a little bit of confidence somewhere.
How do we do that?
That's really, look, one of the things I find myself thinking about is, for all of the talk of media companies trying to make the argument that one of the ways that brands should get through is advertise. They always
Advertising
promote
in
that.
a recession.
Yes. And then I bet when the half-yearly results come out next week for Nine and ARN and Southern Cross Austereo, and if you look at the results that have come out already, and O-Media's are on Monday, when you look down their marketing line, I wonder if they will have increased or decreased their marketing budgets.
Interesting. We will have to view it with interest, and I'm sure we'll hear about it when reported. Look, you picked up in that answer about the obviously an election year, and we've talked a little bit about the US election and the impact of whether it's podcasting or social media. How do you think that's going to impact for us in this election? It's going to be quite interesting to see if we have similar themes and whether that's going to be kind of a beneficial factor for consumers, I guess, but also for the media partners.
Yeah, look, I guess on a couple of levels. One is, will there be any difference between the parties when it comes to their media policy?
Yep.
Obviously, we're waiting to see what's going to happen on the bargaining incentive. You know, the noise this week is that's kind of on hold because of the whole Trump levy thing, which was, you know, honestly, was probably a bit predictable that was going to be how we would end up there. As far as I know, we don't yet know what the coalition's policy is going to be. Is it to go back towards the old news media bargaining code, which of course they legislated in the first place, or lean into this new thing? So we're going to have a few policy things, and I'm sure more will come out there. Then, of course, you just get, you know, the fact that it can be a good time for the industry if there's a decent spend from some of the parties, but of course at the same time they lose the actual federal spend stops.
Yeah.
So.
And I heard in your Medialand podcast you had some points of view on how that spend's increasing at the moment, didn't you?
Yes, by an amazing coincidence, and you can look in the SMI guideline numbers, and you'll see that just
insight.
Whenever an election comes along, suddenly the informational ads telling us what a great job the government is doing also start spending, and they have done. It's something Jeff Howard from Seven commented on in their results announcement last week. There's a piece in, I think it's the AFR this morning, again pointing towards the speed with which the spend is going up on those, particularly in, by an amazing coincidence, the marginal constituencies. So yeah, we've definitely been seeing a little bit of that going on, which happens with every party.
Yeah,
But you know, the criticism is of the system that it keeps happening, and whoever's in opposition at the time says they're going to do something about it, and then when they arrive in government, they generally don't.
Indeed. Now, I want to take the opportunity, whilst I've got the chance to sit and chat to you. I think you're obviously in a unique position with the insights that you have on the landscape, and the fact that you've been looking at it for over a 10 to 15 year period. And obviously you've got a ton of small to medium business owners, Australian-based, in the room. Obviously we work with predominantly Australian small business clients ourselves. I really want to understand from you what you think we can do. We've talked about this kind of Australian-made, supporting local. What are the opportunities for us, and what advice would you give to the people in the room?
Look, I think I'm a big believer in domain expertise, and I have much less domain expertise than the people in the room for running their businesses. So I absolutely wouldn't give advice on that. And also, I'm probably the smallest small business owner in the room as well. But I suppose the one observation I would make is it's very, very tempting for the industry to look to the numbers and the metrics they get from the platforms and to take that as the only measure of effectiveness, because it's quite an attractive way of looking at it, but it's not the only way of seeing the world. And if we do want our local media to succeed, then there are times when one has to look away from the easy metrics that's available from the platforms.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting conversation around this ecosystem of how we all help each other. I mean, you've talked about the importance of media owner bodies coming together. What else can we do around that, do you think, to really support that ecosystem? Obviously, it has an impact. We're all wanting great local content. We want successful local media owners, successful local media agencies. What other things do you think have you seen happening, green shoots that we might be able to move forward with?
Hey, look, and this might be, tell me if this isn't directly answering a question. One of the things I find really interesting going on in the UK at the moment, and I think some hints from the US, is the kind of the people from the traditional media sector getting much better at helping kind of actually measure cross-platform audiences. So there is a view across the board where there's a couple of big projects out of the UK that are being driven by the one of the marketing associations there, for instance. So I wonder if that's part of the answer as well, is just making it a little bit easier to get one genuine picture of the consumer might be something that the whole industry can get behind.
Okay, and you've obviously reported, Adam made some points about holdcos and independent agencies, and you've reported on holding companies, and that's been another area of huge disruption, I guess, over the last 10, 15 years or so. Consolidation, streamlining, renaming, rebadging. It's kind of hard to keep up in some instances. Might suggest that maybe they're struggling to keep up with some of the kind of changes in the landscape and client expectations. What do you think the future is with the holdcos in that instance?
Yeah, changing. I mean, if you look at the
and what the opportunities, I guess, from a landscape perspective from the independent agencies.
Look, it's probably no coincidence with the holdcos that the ones that seem to be doing best, that are growing share price, are the ones that have actually changed structurally the most. I think there's a reason why we've seen sort of Publicis on the up, for instance, when others have gone backwards. There's a huge amount of denial at that level, or even if not denial, then just inertia when it comes. Again, we talk about the many disruptions coming down the track from AI. One of the most obvious ones is so many of the creative agencies still have so much of their model based around head hours. And of course, that's always been a byproduct, or should be a byproduct of the big idea. Yet people aren't paying for the big idea, they're paying for their head hours. And what happens when AI is the thing that's actually occupying the head hours? There's no model there anymore. So there needs to be a change. There's still a demand and a need for the big idea. So a new model will emerge because, of course, the market always fills it in the end, but there'll be a lot of casualties along the way. but yeah, I think one of the obviously the opportunities for independent agencies. Well, I guess one of the opportunities over the years has always been to do it better and then get acquired.
Yes, well, obviously we had some acquisition a week or so ago with Atomic 212, and I think you made the comment at the time that every time there is an acquisition, you think it's going to be the last one, and then comes another one. So do you think it's the last one, or do you think, you know, there's more opportunities? Perhaps people in the room might be in a situation where they might be looking for an acquisition.
Yeah, and I think the reason I was thinking it was one of the last ones this time was just because we're seeing on the holdco side, you know, the trend is towards merging their existing brands. You know, the idea that you need multiple front doors has sort of gone away a bit. Now, the counterbalance to that, of course, is if you've got a really good client list, then the holdco is always going to want to get at those clients somehow. Now, the brand answer might be different, but you know, that I suppose is what balances it. I think last time where I was wrong, and by the way, I'm very often wrong and realise afterwards, I think was where I assumed that as tech and data was becoming more sophisticated, that was going to make it harder and harder to break through as an independent agency just because of the sheer cost. Whereas actually the cost of tech went down rather than up, partly because some of that tech sort of swang back towards, I suppose, the platforms, for instance. You know, they were doing a lot of the investing around it. But yeah, you know, it's still very possible to launch independently into this space, and if there's some sort of point of difference or a relationship point of difference or whatever it is, you know, is being demonstrated many times to you know, to thrive. I mean, you know, 5 years ago we would never been having a conversation like this, for instance. So there's, you know, there's been a really good demonstration that there's something there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might have seen the IMAA lobbying for state and federal governments to look at levelling the playing field for indies and actually considering an independent agency consortium perhaps for the master media contracts. What do you think about that? Do you think that that's something that the government should be doing? We've talked about supporting local, supporting Australia.
Look, I suppose in the end, the job of the government is to spend the money wisely. So to win that argument, I think one has to win the case that it's going to create a better outcome for the taxpayer dollar. And that may actually be true though, but it's prove it.
Yeah, good challenge. Now, I'm getting the nod that we've only got a few minutes, but I do just want to pick up on what happened with Mumbrella. How did you come back after 10 years away? And what do we expect to see from Mumbrella over the next short period?
Well, I like to think I never fully went away.
Okay,
but, so we sold Mumbrella late 2017, and we were on a sort of 2-year management sort of lock-in, and I then stayed for a while beyond that. Had some family reasons for going to the UK, and Plan A actually was we were looking to launch a Mumbrella UK. So I got sent off to do a research visit to either launch something or acquire something, and that was February 2020. So there was no second research visit. But by then I was committed to being in the UK, which is when I launched Unmade. Then sort of came back to Australia about a little bit less than a year later, and the opportunity came along. You know, I guess we became aware that the strategy of Diversified, the people who'd bought it, had perhaps their appetite to own it had decreased. So the opportunity arose to put the band back together.
It's very exciting. And who are you? You know, have you got any causes you're looking to fight? Any fights you're hoping to pick? What should we expect to see in the headlines?
Look, I think the one thing I kind of said was like, when we came through with Mumbrella the first time, we probably ran towards every fight, and we don't necessarily need to do that. But the lens we talk to, you know, a whole team, and this is when members of the sales team join, when members of the editorial team join, is what we stand for is a better industry for everyone. So we're not, you know, much as we value our advertisers, we don't work for our advertisers. Much as we value our relationship with contacts and industry bosses, that's not who we work for. So, you know, when we're arguing against something, it's because we're arguing for a better industry for everyone. And sometimes that means arguing against the status quo and annoying people, but it's always through the lens of what do we think is in the best interest of the industry as a whole.
Great. I can't wait to see what happens. I think we're at time. I'm getting the nod, so can everyone just thank me for Tim spending some time with us? Thank you.
Thanks very much.